It all started with a promise I made to my father during childhood to take care of our family's flower shop and honor the legacy he and my mother built with so much love. But life led me far away, and for many years, I left that promise behind. Until tragedy brought me back to Willowbrook, forcing me to confront not only the decay of the flower shop, but also the crushing guilt of having abandoned everything I once swore to protect. When I returned, I found more than just withered plants and a crumbling place. There was much more at stake: old secrets, unexpected betrayals, and a looming threat that could destroy my family's dream forever. Entangled in a dilemma, I had to assume a new identity to save what was left. But that only brought more challenges and emotional confrontations. Could I truly rescue the flower shop, redeem my mistakes, and honor my parents' memory? Or was I destined to lose everything forever? In the end, I discovered that the love and compassion my father had quietly spread throughout the community would come back in a way I could never have predicted. But before I got there, I had to confront the choices I made and, above all, learn what it really means to blossom, even in the midst of pain. I was only 10 years old, but I still remember the smell of flowers filling the air of our flower shop. It was like a gentle hug with every step I took. I ran between the rows of pots, my hands dirty with soil and my heart full of joy. My father, Lucas, was by my side, always with that look of pride. "Be careful with the roses, Emma," he would say, laughing as I dodged the thorns. I felt free there, as if that place was a part of me, in my DNA. That day, we were making a special arrangement. It wasn't just any order, it was for my mother. She was in the hospital, and though I didn't fully understand what was happening, I knew things weren't right. My father had chosen the most beautiful flowers from the shop: lilies, tulips, and roses, all my mom's favorites. I worked hard to make everything perfect, as if somehow that could make a difference. At the end of the day, as the sun began to set and the shop fell silent, my father knelt beside me, pulling something from his pocket. It was a brooch, small, delicate, with a rose carved into it. "Your mother wanted you to have this when you grew up," he said, his voice softer than usual. "This is our heart." I held the brooch in my small hands, feeling the symbolic weight of it, even without fully understanding. "I will take care of everything, Dad," I promised, my voice filled with childish confidence. He smiled and hugged me. That brooch, in that moment, became a part of me. A few weeks later, the hospital was cold, so different from our flower shop. I sat beside my mother's bed, holding her hand. She was pale, but still had that calm smile that always soothed my heart. I wore the brooch my father had given me, and every time I looked at it, I felt a little stronger. I knew I was there to fulfill the promise I had made, even though everything seemed uncertain. Her breathing was weak, but she opened her eyes and looked at me with tenderness. "Always remember who you are, my flower," she whispered, her voice a thread. Her eyes shone when she saw the brooch pinned to my dress. "Take care of what we love." Those were her last words before she closed her eyes forever. I wasn't ready. I couldn't be. My father, beside me, was quietly sobbing, but I held firm, even with my heart in pieces. I held her hand until the room fell completely silent. In that moment, something in me changed forever. The promise I made to my father expanded. I was no longer just a girl helping out at the flower shop. Now I was her legacy, our family's legacy, that I would have to protect. Years passed. From a dreamer girl surrounded by flowers, I transformed into an executive in Boston. My life drifted further and further from Willowbrook and the flower shop. I was consumed by deadlines, meetings, and reports. It was easier not to think about what I had left behind, until one day the call came. My father was sick, very sick. The words echoed in my head like a blow, forcing me to face everything I had avoided for so long. Going back home was inevitable. When I finally arrived in Willowbrook, it was as if the town had stopped in time, but the flower shop, The flower shop was no longer the vibrant place I remembered. It was crumbling, almost unrecognizable. The flowers that used to color the entrance were dead, and the windows were covered in dust. It mirrored exactly how I felt inside, lost, disconnected from everything that once mattered. I entered hesitantly. Each step inside the shop took me back to the past, as if the weight of the memories was too much to bear. Amid the mess and dust, something caught my attention on the floor. I knelt down, and among the dirt, there was my mother's brooch. That brooch that carried so many promises, so many memories. I picked it up, covered in dust, and felt as if a part of me had been torn away along with everything I had left behind. I had failed. I left the flower shop. I left my father. I left the promise behind. The brooch, now cold in my hands, was a cruel reminder of everything I promised and did not keep. The weight of years of distance hit me hard, and in that moment, among the ruins of our shop and the memories of who I used to be, I knew I needed to do something. I needed to rescue not only the flower shop, but the part of me that had been left behind. When I entered the hospital, the scent of antiseptic hit me hard, mingling with the cold of guilt that already tightened my chest. I knew this moment was coming, but no one is truly prepared for the final goodbye. My father lay there, on that white bed, so fragile and different from the vibrant man I once knew. The same man who had been my anchor, my safe harbor for so many years. Now he was almost unrecognizable, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and weak. I approached the bed, my hands trembling. I sat beside him and, for a moment, just observed him, trying to imprint every detail. The silence was deafening. I took his hand in mine, and the sensation of his cold, fragile skin broke me inside. Tears began to flow silently down my face as I struggled to find the words. "Dad," my voice came out low, almost a whisper. "I'm so sorry." My throat was tight, the weight of everything I had left behind crushing me. "I'm sorry for leaving, for abandoning you, the flower shop. I promised Mom I would take care of everything, but I failed you both. I was so focused on my life in Boston that I let our home slip away." The words came out with difficulty, each carrying a dose of extra regret. I squeezed his hand a little tighter, even knowing he probably couldn't hear me. But suddenly, I felt a slight pressure. His fragile fingers moved, squeezing mine softly. My eyes widened, and my heart raced. He was there, even if just for a brief moment. "Emma?" he whispered, his voice an echo of what it once was. It was the last sound he made before his body relaxed completely, his breath escaping in a final sigh. The world seemed to stop. This was it. My father had left, and I was there, holding his hand while he said his final goodbye. The tears fell uncontrollably now. He was gone, and all I could wish for was that I had been by his side in those last years instead of following my own life away from Willowbrook. The funeral was a blur of faces and muffled voices. Being back in that town made me feel like a stranger in my own home. The familiar faces of the community that once welcomed me now felt distant, as if they no longer recognized me, and maybe they really didn't. I had changed so much, and my absence was evident. I tried to talk to a few people, but their responses were short, polite, yet cold. They remembered the girl who ran through the flower shop, but that girl had grown up and left. I felt the barrier between us, as if an invisible chasm had formed during all those years I was away. The emptiness was painful, and to make matters worse, Jonas, my father's apprentice, stared at me from afar with a look that mixed hurt and anger. I decided to approach him. Maybe I could explain, apologize. Jonas, who had worked alongside my father for so long, had always been like an older brother to me. But before I could say anything, he interrupted me. "Do you think you can just show up here and pretend nothing happened, Emma? That you didn't abandon everything, including your father and the flower shop?" I was taken aback. His voice was cold, cutting. I had hoped for acceptance, but I received judgment instead. "Jonas, I tried to start. but he looked at me with disdain. You ran away, Emma? While you were building your career, your father was here, alone, trying to keep the flower shop afloat. And now you come back, as if you're just trying to clear your conscience. With a quick gesture, he snatched the brooch I was wearing, the same one my mother had given me, and threw it to the ground. The sound of metal clinking against the concrete was a blow. He turned his back and walked away, leaving me standing there, tears silently streaming down my face and a feeling of total isolation. After the funeral, I didn't know what to do. Jonas's words still echoed in my mind, feeding my guilt. The flower shop was abandoned, but it was the only place I knew I could reconnect with everything I had left behind. So I went there. The door was stuck, but I managed to open it with effort. The smell of mildew hit me as soon as I stepped inside, mixed with a distant scent of dead flowers. The contrast between what the flower shop had been and what it had become was a painful reflection of what my life had been over the past few years. Every corner of the place was dusty, the flowers long wilted. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of the memories, the laughter, my father's teachings on how to care for each plant, the moments when I felt at home. Now, everything seemed distant, like a memory from a dream I could barely recall. I ran my hand over a shelf, and amidst the dust, something caught my attention. A notebook. The cover was worn, but I immediately recognized my father's handwriting. It was a journal, filled with notes about the flower shop, sketches of projects he wanted to undertake, plans for a future that never happened. I sat down on the floor and began to flip through the pages, each word bringing me a little closer to him. The notebook brought me back to the reality of everything my father dreamed of that never came to be. I had left him to face it all alone. Now, holding that notebook, I felt the weight of a new mission. I needed to continue what he had started. When I decided to return to the flower shop, I knew I needed to do something drastic. My father was no longer here, and for me, the idea of simply reappearing in Willowbrook as if nothing had happened was impossible. I needed time to understand what had become of the flower shop, and, more than that, to reconnect with the roots I had abandoned. The feeling of urgency and guilt consumed me, and in a moment of total impulsiveness, I called the company where I worked in Boston. As soon as I heard my boss's voice on the other end of the line, without thinking twice, I quit. It was an abrupt act, and the surprise in his voice was clear, but there was no turning back. I needed to do this. Or rather, I felt I had no choice. I hung up and spent a few minutes staring at my phone, trying to process what I had just done. What would come next? How would I begin to rebuild my relationship with the place where I grew up? The answer came in an obvious form. I would have to start from the bottom, without revealing who I was. Being Emma, Lucas's daughter, wouldn't work at that moment. I knew the town was resentful. I knew my absence hadn't gone unnoticed. So, with my head full of ideas, I created Anna, a simpler version of myself. I cut my hair, dyed it dark brown, and bought a pair of thick framed glasses. The look was different enough that people wouldn't recognize me right away. I had to make sure no one connected Anna to Emma. With my new identity, I went to the flower shop, which was now under the management of Marcos, a man I barely knew but had heard about since the time my father was still alive. Marcos had worked with my father for a short period and had seemingly taken over the place after my life took another turn. I entered the flower shop's office, where a small makeshift counter served as a reception area, and I went straight to the point. I couldn't be too bold. I needed a role that would allow me to stay in the background, as invisible as possible. Anna, the newcomer to town, asked for a job as a cleaner. Marcos looked me up and down. He might have found it strange for someone to show up out of nowhere, but he seemed desperate for help. With the flower shop in decline, any pair of hands would be welcome. Cleaning? He asked, surprised. I nodded, trying to appear confident, even though my hands were sweating under the pressure. Yes, I do cleaning and organize the spaces. I can start immediately. He shrugged and agreed. without much questioning. Perhaps he was too busy to care or simply didn't expect a young, discreet woman to be there just to clean. And so Anna walked through the door of the flower shop, taking on the role of cleaner. That same afternoon, I began to circulate through the halls. The place was in ruins. The vibrant energy I once felt there seemed to have disappeared completely. Neglect was evident in every corner. I walked with a bucket and cleaning products in hand, but my eyes were analyzing everything. It was hard to believe the state of the flower shop. The flowers, which once brought life, were wilted, the shelves covered in dust, and the smell that used to be fresh and joyful was now damp and sad. I started slowly to reorganize everything, in silence, almost like a ghost. Each arrangement I repositioned, each vase I cleaned, was an attempt to reconnect with what my father had left behind. He had his own system for organizing flowers, and I followed that pattern without anyone noticing. My father had taught me to care for every detail, and now I was bringing that back. I knew it wasn't enough, but it was the first step. One day, while organizing a shelf in the back, a young mother approached me. She looked tired, but her smile was gentle, almost relieved to be there. "You're new around here, aren't you?" she asked, her curious eyes studying me. I simply nodded, keeping my disguise. "My name is Sophia," she continued, extending her hand. "This flower shop, this place, it saved my life." I didn't expect to hear that. Sophia, not knowing who I really was, began to tell her story. Years ago, she and her family were going through terrible difficulties. Her husband lost his job, and with a newborn baby, they had almost nothing. One day, desperate, she walked into the flower shop. She didn't know what to do. She just wanted a little peace. That was when she met my father. Your father. Lucas, he was so generous. Without even knowing me, he gave me flowers and said I deserved a little color in my life. He listened to me and offered help. That gave me the strength to carry on. I will never forget what he did for me. Sophia smiled with her eyes full of gratitude, and I felt my heart tighten. Her words hit me like a punch. My father, always so generous, always seeing people beyond their needs. And me? I had left, distanced myself from all this, abandoning not only him, but also all these people he had touched. Tears came, but I held them back. I couldn't let her see my pain. "He was an incredible man," I murmured, my voice wavering as I struggled to maintain my disguise. Sophia nodded, unaware of the truth behind my words. As Sophia walked away, my mind kept echoing the guilt that was growing inside me. The impact my father had made on the community was much greater than I had imagined. He was more than just the owner of the flower shop. He was the heart of the town. And I, who was once meant to carry on this legacy, had left everything behind as if it didn't matter. I felt a new pressure within me, something deeper than mere nostalgia. It was a need for redemption. As the days went by, I began to realize that something was wrong with how the flower shop was being managed. Marcos, the manager, seemed more concerned with finances than with the quality or care of the flowers. I started paying closer attention and noticed that he was constantly skimming money from the records, manipulating finances for his own benefit. Everything was done subtly, but visible to someone who knew what to look for. I decided to investigate further. I rummaged through the papers in the office whenever he wasn't around, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed increasingly dark. Each new document I found confirmed what I feared. Marcos was stealing from the flower shop, diverting money and letting the place fall apart while he profited. I needed to do something, but at the same time, I knew my position there was fragile. I couldn't simply reveal myself, not yet. That was when Jonas appeared. I was so focused on the spreadsheets that I didn't hear his footsteps approaching. When I lifted my head, he was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me. "What are you doing here?" The tension in his voice was evident. My heart raced, and I knew there was no way out without an explanation. I was just organizing the papers. I tried to justify. But he narrowed his eyes, suspicious. Anna, right. But something about you, no, this isn't right. He stepped closer, staring at me, and then the expression on his face changed completely. Emma? The shock in his voice was undeniable. And at that moment, I knew everything had crumbled. I fell silent, fear and guilt consuming me. He knew. And now there was no hiding anymore. You came back and hid from all of us. The hurt in his eyes was palpable. Why, Emma? Why didn't you tell the truth? Why did you pretend to be someone else? His words were like knives, and I had no answers. All I wanted was to fix things, but now it seemed I had only made them worse. When Jonas discovered that Anna was actually me, Emma, the air seemed to freeze in the flower shop's office. His eyes, which had previously stared at me with suspicion, now sparkled with anger. He slammed the door shut and stepped closer, his face tense and incredulous. You've been lying to me this whole time, Emma? You think you can come back here after everything and just hide from us? His voice was cutting, and I shrank under the weight of his words. He was furious, and rightly so. I had betrayed him, betrayed the trust we once shared, hiding behind a false identity. I tried to speak, but his anger was so palpable that the words got caught in my throat. You abandoned us. Abandoned your father, abandoned this place, and now, when everything is in ruins, you come back as if you're the savior. Who do you think you are? Each word was a blow, and I knew he was right. But hearing that out loud, seeing the pain in his eyes, was harder than I had imagined. Jonas, please, listen to me. My voice came out low, pleading. I know I was wrong. I know I left you behind. But it wasn't for lack of love. It was fear. It was the need to get away from everything. I was lost. Tears began to stream down my face, but Jonas didn't seem impressed. Lost? While you were in Boston, living your life, we were here, Emma. We held everything together while it all fell apart. And now? You think you can come back and simply reclaim what you abandoned? It doesn't work that way. He stepped forward, his fists clenched in frustration. You don't deserve your father's legacy. Those words cut deep. Was he right? Did I really not deserve it? My vision blurred with tears as I tried to find my voice. Jonas, please. Let me fix this. I know I can't erase the past, but let me try. I want to save what's left of my father's legacy. Give me a chance to make things right. Jonas hesitated. His face still bore anger, but there was something in his eyes that indicated he was listening. He ran a hand through his hair, nervous, and sighed. One chance, Emma. Just one. But I want honesty, complete honesty. You're going to tell me everything, what happened, why you left, and why you're back now. If I catch you lying, I won't hesitate to kick you out again. I nodded, tears still streaming down my face. I promise. He gave me one last hard look before leaving me alone in the office with the weight of guilt and hope. From that moment on, the truth was my only option. I revealed my identity to the other employees, each word laden with regret and a plea for forgiveness. At first, the reactions varied, and I can't say I was surprised. Some looked at me with sympathy, especially those who still remembered me running around the flower shop as a child. But many others stared at me with distrust. To them, I was not Lucas's daughter deserving of his legacy, but someone who fled when the flower shop needed her most. Sophia, who had shared stories about my father with me, was one of the first to support me. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said, I know how much you loved your father. It couldn't have been easy for you to leave. But we all make mistakes. What matters is what you do now. Her words gave me strength, but didn't calm the storm that still brewed. Others, like Carlos, who had been working at the flower shop since before I was born, were not as kind. You think you can just come back and claim what you abandoned, Emma? He asked, his voice harsh. We've been here fighting for this since your father got sick. And where were you? I don't think you can just show up and fix everything. He crossed his arms, his cold gaze piercing through me. I tried to justify myself, to explain my own dilemmas and fears, but it felt futile. The wound my absence had caused in the community was deeper than I had imagined. The division among the employees was evident. There were those, like Sophia, who gave me a chance, and those, like Carlos, who didn't trust me. It was like walking through a minefield. Every move I made could be the key to regaining their trust or destroying it entirely. But there was no other choice. I was determined to save the flower shop, even if it meant facing the hostility and judgment of those I wanted to protect the most. As I tried to rebuild bridges with the employees and the community, a growing feeling that something more sinister was happening took hold of me. There was a tension in the air, something I couldn't quite identify at first, but that would reveal itself abruptly. It was when, during one of my discreet inspections of the flower shop's files, that I found the documents. Among the shop's financial spreadsheets, hidden in old folders, were papers that showed the true extent of Marcos's corruption. He was embezzling money, using the flower shop as a front for his own profit. And worst of all, there were records of a negotiation to sell the place. He was planning to sell it to a big investor who would destroy my father's legacy to build a mall or some other lifeless development. My heart raced. I ran to Jonas with the documents in hand, my mind buzzing with the urgency of the situation. When I found him, he was at the back of the flower shop, tending to one of the few arrangements that still had life. "Jonas, you need to see this." My voice was breathless, and he looked at me with concern before taking the papers. His expression darkened as he read. I knew Marcos was taking advantage, but this? He shook his head, incredulous. "He's trying to sell the flower shop. He's destroying everything." "We can't let this happen," I said, my voice firm. "We can't let him ruin what's left of my father's legacy. We need to act. Now." Jonas nodded, his eyes now locked on mine. There was a silent alliance between us. We knew that if we wanted to save the flower shop, we needed to unite and take down Marcos. This was our last chance to honor Lucas's name, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. Calling a secret meeting was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. The risk was enormous. I needed everyone's trust, but I also knew that not everyone trusted me yet. However, there was no choice. If we wanted to save the flower shop, I had to expose Marcos' plan and rally everyone around me. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anxiety that tightened my chest as I waited for the employees to arrive. The small room at the back of the flower shop was filled with old shelves, dusty boxes, and the smell of dried flowers. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with uncertainty. Once everyone was present, I closed the door, feeling the gravity of the moment. "I gathered you here because something very serious is happening, something that can no longer be ignored." My voice sounded stronger than I expected, but my heart was racing. Sophia, Jonas, Carlos, and a few other trusted employees watched me with mixed expressions. I could see the distrust in some eyes, but I also saw something that gave me strength, the willingness to listen. Marcos has been embezzling money from the flower shop for months. He's stealing from all of us, and worse, he's planning to sell this place. My father's legacy is about to be destroyed. A dense silence fell over the room. Some faces showed shock, others despair. I continued, trying not to lose control of my emotions. "I know many of you still distrust me. I know I made mistakes by withdrawing. But I'm here now, willing to fight. And I need you by my side. We need to stop Marcos. We need to save the flower shop." Sophia was the first to stand up. Her eyes were glistening with tears as she said, "I support you, Emma. Your father gave us so much. He believed in us, and I believe in you. We cannot let this happen." The sincerity in her voice touched me deeply, and for a moment, I felt a lump in my throat. One by one, the other employees began to stand, some more hesitant than others, but all willing to fight. Carlos, who had been one of my biggest critics, looked at me for a long moment before murmuring, "Your father believed in doing what was right. I will fight by your side, Emma." The room, which had been steeped in distrust, now pulsed with a new sense of hope. A weight seemed to lift off my shoulders, but I knew the challenge was just beginning. Later, when the meeting had ended and everyone had returned to work, Jonas approached me with a tense expression. There was something in his eyes that seemed to carry deep pain. He hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he might back down. But then, in a low voice, he confessed, "Emma, I need to tell you something." I turned a blind eye to many of the things Marcos did. I wasn't dead to him. I stood still, trying to process what he had just said. "You knew what he was doing and said nothing?" My voice came out harsher than I intended, but the feeling of betrayal was instant. Jonas looked away, visibly ashamed. "I was scared," he continued. "Scared of losing everything. The flower shop was what kept me going after your father passed. And Marcos, he knew that. He used it against me. I felt trapped. But I know I should have done something sooner." His voice faltered at the end of the sentence, and I realized how difficult it was for him to admit that. My emotions were on edge, but I couldn't let Jonas sink into guilt. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Jonas, I forgive you. I know what it's like to feel trapped by fear. But that ends now. Together, we can fix this. We can stop Marcos and save what's left of my father's legacy." He looked at me, surprised by my forgiveness, and finally, a small sad smile appeared on his face. "Thank you, Emma. I will stand by you, no matter what happens." With the support of Jonas and the employees, we devised a plan to expose Marcos and prevent the sale of the flower shop. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but with the documents I found, we had enough evidence to confront him. The plan was simple. Confront Marcos with the evidence and then take it to the city, where he could no longer deny his actions. I was nervous but determined. There was no more room for hesitation. Everything was at stake. However, things began to go wrong faster than I imagined. During the execution of the plan, I noticed that Marcos was starting to get suspicious. He began asking questions, closely observing the employees, until he finally confronted me directly. "Emma, do you think you can meddle in my business and get away with it?" His voice was low but filled with threat. He stepped closer, staring at me with a cold smile. "Do you think you can save this flower shop? The truth is, this place is dead, and you will sink with it if you keep interfering." My heart raced. He knew. He knew I was investigating, and now he was intimidating me. But as much as I was trembling inside, as much as fear tried to take over, something stronger grew in me at that moment. I could no longer run away. I faced Marcos, trying to keep my voice steady. "You will not destroy what my father built. If I have to lose everything to protect my family's legacy, then so be it. But you will not go unpunished for this." Marcos laughed, but there was something nervous in his laughter. He knew I wasn't bluffing. "You will regret this," he said, his voice laced with venom. "Don't underestimate me, Emma." He walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway. My body was shaking, fear still present, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a strength within me that I didn't know existed. I was ready to fight, to risk everything. No matter what came next, I would not let Marcos destroy what my father had spent his life building. After Marcos left, leaving me there alone in the hallway, the weight of the situation finally hit me with full force. My body began to tremble, not just from fear, but from emotional exhaustion. I had tried to maintain a facade of strength in front of him, but now, with no one to see me, I felt my legs weaken. I collapsed on the floor of the flower shop, the tears I had held back for so long finally falling. The fear of losing the flower shop, my father's legacy, felt overwhelming. I felt an anguish so great that it was as if the air was insufficient to breathe. "I can't do this. I can't do this alone," I whispered to myself, my voice broken by sobs. My thoughts were tangled. Doubts surged like a flood. Was I really capable of saving what was left? Deep down, should I have just left everything as it was and moved on with my life in Boston? Every choice I made felt wrong, Every step seemed to lead to a greater disaster. That's when Sophia appeared. She entered the room slowly, probably hearing my sobs. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me on the floor in silence. I continued crying, too exhausted to pretend I was okay. After a while, I managed to murmur, "Sophia, sometimes I think it would have been better if I had never come back. I failed my father. I failed all of you. None of this would have happened if I had just stayed away." Sophia, with tears in her eyes, turned to me and hugged me. A simple embrace, but it carried so much affection, so much understanding. "Emma, I know you feel like you failed. But being here now, trying to save all of this, is what truly matters. We all make mistakes. We all have moments when we run away from what is difficult. But you came back, and that shows your strength." Those words, spoken with such tenderness, penetrated deeply. The pain was still there, but the weight that suffocated me began to lift. I allowed myself to cry on Sophia's shoulder, absorbing the comfort she offered. Maybe she was right. Perhaps the mere fact that I was there, fighting, was already something important. That same night, as I tried to piece myself back together, Jonas appeared with an envelope in hand. His eyes were dark, and he hesitated, as if he was about to hand me something that could change everything. "I found this in the office. It's for you," he said, extending the envelope. I took the yellowed paper and felt its weight in my hands. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakable. It was my father's writing. My heart raced, and my hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. "Dear Emma, I always knew you would need to leave here one day, that you would need your own space to discover who you are outside the walls of this flower shop. I know your departure wasn't easy, and it may have been painful for all of us, but I understand that it was necessary for you. Do not blame yourself for it. I have always been proud of who you were, Emma, even when you were far away. The love I have for you never depended on you being here with me. The flower shop will always be a part of us, but it does not define you. If one day you decide to return, let it be because you found within yourself the courage to care for what is truly important. With love, Dad." Tears fell freely as I read the letter, as if each word washed away a piece of the guilt I had carried. My father? He always knew. He understood the need I had to step away, and yet he never stopped loving me. The letter was a reminder that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. All he wanted was for me to come back, not out of obligation, but because I was ready. And I was. I looked at Jonas, still holding the letter with trembling hands. He knew, Jonas, he always knew that I would need to leave, and he forgave me for it. Jonas nodded, his gaze gentle. "Your father always knew the person you were, Emma, perhaps better than you did yourself." The next morning, still impacted by my father's words, I knew it was time to face the truth with the staff. They deserved to know everything, not just about Marcos and his corruption, but about me, about how I felt, and what brought me back. I gathered everyone at the flower shop, and when the last person entered the room, I realized there was no turning back. I stood in the center, holding my father's letter. The silence was almost suffocating, but also necessary. I took a deep breath before I began to speak. I know many of you have doubts about me. I know my absence was painful, and that I failed all of you. But today, I want to tell my story. I want you to know why I returned, and why I'm fighting to keep this place alive. I told everything. I spoke about the fear that led me to leave, about the weight of carrying my father's legacy, and how I lost myself along the way. I talked about how I always thought I wasn't enough, that I would never be able to care for the flower shop like my father did. I recounted the sleepless nights in Boston, thinking about how I had abandoned my family, and about the confrontation with Marcos. The words came out with difficulty, but they were true. I am here today, not because I want to prove something to you, but because I finally understood what my father always wanted. He knew I needed time, that I needed to find myself before coming back. And now I am here because I believe that together, we can save what is left of this place, not for me, but for what my father represented. There were tears in the eyes of many employees, and I couldn't hold mine back either. The room was silent, and for a moment, I feared my words wouldn't be enough. But then Sophia stood up, followed by Jonas and Carlos. One by one, all the employees approached me, tears in their eyes, but smiles on their faces. "We're with you, Emma," said Sophia, her voice soft but firm. "We will fight for this together." I felt a deep relief, a unity I had never felt before. In that moment, I realized I was no longer alone. And finally, the weight of the choice I made to return transformed into strength. We were ready to face whatever came next, together, for my father's legacy. The decisive day had finally arrived. The meeting at the town hall was scheduled for the afternoon, and the air in Willowbrook felt heavier than usual. I knew that everything depended on that moment, not just the fate of the flower shop, but also mine. Marcos had organized the public meeting to expedite the process of selling the land, and his plan was clear: use the power and connections he had in the city to finalize the sale before anyone could contest it. I entered the town hall alongside Jonas and the other staff, with the evidence in hand and an intense chill in my stomach. The room was filled with town residents, many of whom had known the flower shop since my father managed it. The buzz of conversation stopped as soon as Marcos began to speak. He was good with words. Manipulation was his forte. He presented his case as if the sale were inevitable, a necessary change for the progress of the city, and for a moment, I saw looks of agreement among some of the attendees. But when it was my turn, I stood up, my hands trembling as I held the documents. I took a deep breath, trying to find the courage my father always had. "This sale cannot happen," I began, my voice steady but my heart racing. "What Marcos hasn't told you is that he has been embezzling money from the flower shop for months, and now he's trying to cover it up with the sale of the land. He wants to get rid of what's left before the truth comes to light." There was a profound silence in the room, and I saw the surprise on people's faces. Marcos immediately tried to deny it, claiming that I was fabricating lies to impede the city's progress. But then, with steady hands, I began to distribute the documents that proved every fraudulent transaction, every cent embezzled into Marcos' pockets. "These documents don't lie, and neither do I. The flower shop is more than just a piece of land. It is the heart of this city. My father believed in caring for people, not exploiting them for personal gain." I looked at Marcos, feeling the weight of the truth finally being revealed. He was visibly rattled, trying to maintain his composure, but the public support he had hoped for was starting to evaporate. People began to murmur among themselves, and I knew that control was slipping from his hands. Just when it seemed that everything was resolved, Marcos, in a last desperate effort, took the floor again. This time, his voice was broken, and the cold expression he always carried had vanished. "You don't know everything," he began, and silence returned to the room. My son is seriously ill. He needs an expensive treatment that I cannot afford. That's why I did what I did." The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. Everyone was in shock. Even I was. The man I had hated for so long, who had destroyed my family's legacy out of greed, was now confessing that everything he had done was for love of his son. The impact of his words was immediate. I looked at the documents in my hands, the evidence of his corruption, and felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Suddenly, the villain didn't seem so clear-cut. He continued, his voice trembling. "I know I was wrong, but I did it because I didn't know what else to do. My son is all I have, and I would do anything to save him." His words resonated with desperation, and as much as I hated what he had done, I couldn't ignore the fact that he was also suffering. The anger I felt for months began to transform into something much more complex. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I found myself in a terrible conflict. He had destroyed so much, caused so much harm. But at the same time, he was fighting for his son, just as my father would have fought for me. I knew I had the power to destroy Marcos in that moment, to ensure he paid for everything. But I also knew that if I did that, his son's future would be devastated. I stood up again, my hands trembling and my heart heavy. All eyes were on me, waiting for my response. Marcos was there, exposed, desperate. The words came out slowly, heavy as lead. I cannot help but feel compassion for your son, Marcos. No parent should have to watch their child suffer. My voice trembled, and the tears I had been holding began to fall. But nothing justifies destroying what is important to so many other people. Nothing justifies destroying my father's legacy. There was a moment of silence. I was in a deep moral dilemma, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I won't turn you into the police. I can't be responsible for destroying your child's future. But you can't continue here. You must leave the flower shop immediately and never come back. There is no place for you in Willowbrook after what you've done. Marcos fell silent, tears glistening in his eyes. He knew he had lost. He knew that although I hadn't completely destroyed him, he would never be welcome in the town again. With his head down, he nodded, accepting his defeat. "Thank you," he murmured without looking up. I was visibly shaken, trying to maintain my composure as tears streamed down my face. The pain of partially forgiving someone who had destroyed so much, mixed with the compassion I felt for him as a father, was overwhelming. I looked at the crowd, trying to find the final words. No love, no matter how true, justifies destroying other loves. The words came out heavy with pain, but also with truth. Marcos left the room in silence, defeated, and the meeting ended with a mixed sense of relief and sadness. The flower shop was saved, but the emotional weight of the day still rested on my shoulders. Jonas approached and placed a hand on my shoulder, offering silent support. I knew that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but now, with the support of everyone around me and the weight of forgiveness I chose to grant, I was finally ready to move on. The sensation of rebirth in the flower shop was palpable. There was an energy in the air that I hadn't seen in years, as if each brick, each plant, was being revived along with all of us. The entire town seemed to be involved in the process of renewal. On one side, Sophia and some of the staff were rearranging the flowers, while Jonas supervised the painting of the exterior walls, transforming the old space into something new yet familiar. It was exciting to see how the flower shop was becoming more than just a business. It was turning into a community space, something everyone wanted to protect. I was tidying up my father's old office when I found something that made me stop. As I moved a stack of forgotten boxes at the back of the cabinet, I stumbled upon a worn leather notebook. When I opened it, I froze. It was my father's diary, something I didn't know existed. Each page contained small acts of kindness he had performed over the years, always without fanfare. He had helped people in difficult times, offered discounts disguised as promotions, donated flowers for weddings and funerals without ever expecting anything in return. No one, besides him, knew. Tears streamed down my face as I flipped through the diary, seeing how many lives he had touched in silence. My father had been an incredibly generous man, and I knew he had never sought recognition for it. This discovery hit me deeply, as if I finally understood that my role there was much more than just keeping the business running. I needed to continue what he started, to perpetuate the kindness he had sown in every silent gesture. He didn't just run a flower shop, he cultivated hope, and now it was my turn to carry on that legacy. The community was more united than ever, and the flower shop was now a symbol of everything Lucas represented. For the grand reopening, we organized a charity event. The idea was to bring everyone into the renovated space, celebrate this new phase, and raise funds for future community projects, just as my father would have done. The event began with live music, and soon everyone was laughing, conversing, and sharing stories. There was a special sparkle in each person's eyes, as if everyone knew that the flower shop had returned to be more than just a place for sales. It was a refuge of compassion. In one of the most emotional moments, residents who had been helped by my father over the years took the stage to share their stories. Each testimony was a reminder of the impact he had, of how much he was loved and respected. An elderly man recounted how, years ago, Lucas had donated flowers for his wife's funeral because he simply couldn't afford them. A young mother shared that, in a moment of desperation, my father had offered her flowers for free for her wedding, saying that every ceremony of love deserved to be celebrated. As these stories were shared, I felt my chest tighten with emotion. When it was my turn to speak, I struggled to hold back tears. My father was a man of many flowers and many silent acts of kindness. Today, I want to dedicate this rebirth of the flower shop to him, to the generous spirit he always carried. He believed that true beauty lay not just in the flowers, but in what they represented: love, care, hope. I glanced at the sky for a brief moment, feeling his presence. And that is what we will continue here. I am not just honoring his legacy, I am promising that, just like him, I will keep this place as a symbol of all that is good in this community. Applause filled the air, but more than that, I felt a wave of solidarity and unity. Each person at that event seemed connected by an invisible thread of gratitude and love. The flower shop was no longer just my responsibility, it was ours. There was a new strength within me, a certainty that we were on the right path. Lucas's flower shop would live on, and with it, the legacy of kindness he had planted. After the event ended and the crowd began to disperse, I found myself alone in the flower shop. The place was silent now, but full of life, each corner vibrating with the energy of the people who had passed through. I walked through the aisles, observing the newly arranged flowers, the new shelves, the freshness that lingered in the air. The soft light of the setting sun bathed the environment, creating gentle shadows that danced among the plants. I approached my father's old table, now renewed and full of new purposes. I sat for a moment, absorbing what we had achieved. I knew he would be proud, but more than that, I felt he was there, in every flower, in every detail. The brooch he gave me as a child, which I now wore all the time, seemed to shine under the golden light. It was then that a gentle breeze passed through the room, causing a petal to detach from one of the flowers and fall softly onto the brooch. I closed my eyes, allowing the moment to envelop me. There were no more doubts, no more fears. I whispered softly, knowing he could hear me wherever he was. "I'm taking care of everything, Dad." The words came out with a tranquility I hadn't felt in a long time, as if finally my heart was at peace. I stood up, taking a deep breath, and left the flower shop with a sense of mission accomplished. I had found my place, my purpose. I was no longer just a daughter trying to follow in her father's footsteps. Now I was charting my own path, carrying his legacy of kindness and compassion into the future. Walking through the flower shop now felt like living a dream I never knew I had. A year after the renovation, the place was more alive than I ever imagined. Flowers burst forth in vibrant colors throughout the aisles, and every corner seemed to pulse with the energy of the community. The soft fragrance of petals filled the air, and the sunlight streaming through the large windows reflected off the green leaves, creating a magical glow. The flower shop, which had once been on the brink of collapse, was now flourishing with a new generation of apprentices, just like Jonas once was. Young people brimming with enthusiasm, eager to learn and carry forward the spirit of generosity that my father had planted here. As I walked through the aisles, my eyes landed on Sophia, busy with the floral arrangements she crafted so well. But something in her posture caught my attention. There was a different sparkle in her eyes, a softness in her gestures. I approached with a smile, and she immediately let out a shy laugh, as if she knew what I was about to ask. "You've got a secret, don't you?" I asked, tilting my head, already sensing what she was going to tell me. Sophia nodded with a radiant smile. "I'm expecting my second child," she revealed, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I wanted to tell you first, but I wanted to make sure everything was okay." She gently caressed her belly, as if cradling the future in her hands. An immense warmth flooded over me. Sophia had been a rock for me during tough times, and now seeing her step into this new phase of life filled my heart with joy. Without a second thought, I took the brooch from my mother that I always carried on my chest. It was a simple piece of jewelry, but for me, it represented care, love, and protection. I placed it in Sophia's hands. "This brooch belonged to my mother," I whispered, feeling the emotion swell in my voice. "She gave it to me when I was a child and always told me it represented her heart. Now it's yours. It belongs to those who care with love." Sophia was left speechless, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, holding the brooch as if it were the most precious object in the world. I simply embraced her, feeling that this gesture was more than the passing of an object. It was the continuation of the cycle of love that the flower shop represented. Later that day, as we wrapped up some details in the garden, Jonas approached with a smile that I knew all too well. He was hiding something, and I knew it was important. "What is it now, Jonas?" I asked, crossing my arms playfully, trying to pry the secret from him. "Come with me, there's something I want to show you," he said, leading me down one of the new paths we had created. The garden seemed to grow more beautiful each day, but Jonas took me to an area I didn't recognize. When we arrived, my eyes filled with tears immediately. It was a completely new section, with flowers carefully planted in every corner, wooden benches perfectly placed to create a serene environment. In the center was a small fountain surrounded by roses, just like the ones my mother loved so much. Jonas looked at me with an emotional expression. "This is a space dedicated to the mothers of the community," he began, his voice soft and full of meaning. "Mothers who, like yours, have lost loved ones, or who need a place to bloom again. It's a tribute to your mother and to all the mothers who need a space to heal." I couldn't speak. Jonas's gesture was something I never would have expected, but it touched my heart deeply. He had created a place that not only honored my mother, but provided a refuge for so many others who, like me, needed healing. "Jonas, I don't know how to thank you," I murmured, embracing him with all the strength I could muster. He simply smiled, as if he knew this was the gift I needed most. The inauguration of the new section was emotional. The community once again gathered to celebrate. Soft music played in the background, and the murmur of happy conversations filled the air. The mothers of the town, those who had lost children, husbands, or other loved ones, were present. Each one seemed to find solace in that space. During the event, as I walked among the newly planted flowers, an elderly woman I didn't know approached me with a gentle smile. Her eyes were soft but full of stories. "You must be Emma," she said, her voice low but laden with meaning. "I knew your mother many years ago. She was the first person to help me when I lost my husband." My breath caught in my throat. "My mother?" I asked, surprised. The woman nodded and slowly pulled a dried flower from her bag. "Your mother gave me this flower on the day my world fell apart. I didn't have the strength to continue, and she offered me this flower saying, 'We will bloom again, even in pain.' I've kept this flower all these years as a symbol of her kindness. Now, I think it's time to return it to you." Tears welled in my eyes as I took the flower. It was a piece of my past I had never known. My mother had touched so many lives in ways I could never have imagined. "I don't know what to say," I murmured, moved by the depth of that gesture. "You don't need to say anything," the woman replied, smiling. "Just continue what your mother started. She would be so proud of you." I held the flower tenderly, feeling the connection between the past and the present intertwining. The journey I had traveled, filled with pain, challenges, and discoveries, had brought me to this moment. And now, more than ever, I knew that my mother's and father's legacy would continue to live on, not only in the flowers we sold, but in the hearts we touched. 5 years had passed, and the flower shop thrived more than ever. Morning sun filtered through windows, illuminating vibrant flowers. My daughter, Lily, ran through the corridors like a playground, familiar with every flower. Her joyful presence filled the shop. She has her grandmother's touch, I murmured. Jonas, now my husband, heard it and wrapped his arm around me, smiling. And your mother's heart, he added, kissing my head. We exchanged a glance, feeling content and where we were meant to be. The flower shop celebrated 50 years, filled with music, food, and nostalgia. Guests, old and new, shared heartfelt memories. Called to the stage, I spoke of my father's legacy. Among the crowd, I saw a woman who reminded me of my mother. As the celebration ended, I sat by the fountain, holding my mother's brooch. I felt my father's presence, whispering, "I'm proud of you."
In the end, Emma understood that the promises made in the past can guide us back to what truly matters. The love and generosity of her parents blossomed not only in the flower shop, but also in the hearts of those around her. Life is about redemption, and it's never too late to start over. Are we all taking care of what truly matters in our lives? If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to check out the next recommended video in the final card. Thank you so much for watching.